Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another installment of Principles of Management or another installment of the next chapter. So, this chapter is on decision making, two different ways of decision making, individual and group decision making. So, before we move forward with the chapter, please make sure you have the results for your assessment of decision making style. You would have either taken that assessment as part of your Connect assignments on McGraw-Hill Connect, or you may have taken that from the book. So feel free to pause this video, go back, and take the results down. You probably would like to look at them when we start talking about decision-making styles in a few slides. So what is decision making? Well, making a decision, plain and simple. But why is decision making important? Well, till now we've been talking about planning, right? So if you remember the four functions of management: planning, organizing, leading, controlling. We've been talking about planning. When we start this topic is when we officially start talking about organizing. So you have all your plans set, you have your strategic goals. Now is the time to start implementing them. Before you implement, you have to make a lot of decisions. And decision making is an area of research that's being studied by computer scientists, psychologists, management thinkers, and a ton of people are looking at how people make decisions and what is the best way to make decisions. So the first the first model of decision making that was put forward was the model put forward by economists. And they suggested, the very first model they suggested was the rational model of decision making. So it goes something like this. Stage one, they said, is when people identify the problem or the opportunity. And then they move on to the next stage where they think of alternative solutions. And once they've thought of every alternative solution, they then move on to stage three, which is evaluating each and every alternative solution. All right, remember, you're coming up with every alternative solution that you possibly can to solve this problem or to approach this opportunity. And in stage three, you will take each and every alternative and evaluate it as a possible solution. Finally, after your evaluation in stage four, whatever solutions are left or whatever solutions you sort of sieve out from stage three are the solutions you implement in stage four. You implement that particular solution which you decided was the best out of the evaluation process. And then once you've implemented it, that's it. End of problem. It sounds simplistic, and I wish human decision-making worked like this. It was meant to be a descriptive model. A descriptive model is a model that describes how things are actually done. It explains how managers, make decisions. It assumes managers will make logical decisions that will be best in furthering the organization's interest. And so because this was the very first model, it's also called the classical model of decision making. But there are a couple of problems, all right? The problems they are that it assumes rationality on part of human beings. And so let me give you an example. Let's take the example of you deciding to do an undergrad degree. When you decided to do an undergrad degree, stage one is, let's say you decided, well, I need an undergrad. And you decided you wanted to do a bachelor's in, let's say, management, Bachelor of Science in Management. So according to this rational model or the classical model, in stage two, you will think of every possible school anywhere in the world that offers a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration or Management, whichever you want. But is that really how you decided? Did you go online and write down hundreds and hundreds and thousands of names, because that's how many schools in the world offer this degree? You probably didn't. What you did was you had boundary conditions. You probably, since this is an online class, you probably looked at what are the different schools or colleges that offer me that degree online. You may have looked at what are the schools and colleges that offer the degree, but it's also affordable. So you have these conditions or boundary conditions that you apply. So stage 2 in itself, we've seen that the rational model doesn't work. Another problem with the rational model is it assumes logical thinking and that people are not working on emotions. But how many of you made the decision to take an online class because you wanted to be close to family? Well, that's an emotional decision. Or how many of you decided to take this class online because you were tired of driving up to campus somewhere? Again, that's not a decision based on logic necessarily. So that's one of the big problems in a rational model, that it, a couple of problems, of course, but it assumes that people have no prejudices or emotional blind spots, that, you're able to logically evaluate every alternative and rank them. Well, let's look at the alternative stage. If there were 6 universities that you decided provided an online education, and they all had similar, you didn't even look at how expensive or cheap they are, but you realize that this university that you're going in is where your friends went, and that's why you want to go there. Well, you're evaluating your decision or that solution not based on a logical thought pattern, but based on emotion. And most of us do that. We do it. We want to eat something not because it's good for us, but because we want it. That's emotion. Right? That's a big flaw in this model. It assumes people are very rational and logical, but we're not really. Anyone who's ever stayed up late to watch a movie instead of studying for the exam next day knows that we don't make rational decisions. Anyone who's dated that person that everyone told you shouldn't date, but you still wanted to because it was an experience and it was exciting, and you did it because it's exciting. Well, you were doing it based on emotion, not based on logical thinking. Another problem with this model is it assumes complete information, right? It assumes that there is no uncertainty. Well, as we talked about in stage 2, if you are thinking up of every single alternative, do you really have access to information to every single school or college out there that offers that degree? Not really. This model says you should obtain complete, error-free information about all alternatives, but that's not possible. And then finally, it assumes that the best decision for the organization is, it's confident of the best future course of action. You coolly choose the alternative that you believe will most benefit the organization. Again, it's making these 3 broad assumptions, right? So over the years, economists found out when psychologists started poking holes in the rational model of decision making and saying, well, wait a minute. Human beings are not really rational. We are very irrational. We don't really think logically. We think from, and if you identify in something that later you regret, our emotions dictate our decision making, whether we like it or not. Because of all the problem, economists with a different model, and they called it the bounded rationality model. Now remember, this model still assumes that there is rationality, right? But it suggests that the ability of decision makers to be rational is limited by numerous constraints, like time and money. You may not have the time or the money to look up every single alternative. Or complexity. The situation is so complex that you can't really solve it through those steps. Or that you're not, you're not built, you have limitations, you're not smart enough to make that decision, or that you may have imperfect information. People are giving you imperfect or incomplete information. So this model, bounded rationality model, takes the original classical model and says within boundary conditions. But there's still a problem, because it still assumes human beings do not function on emotions, that when we're making decisions like whether we should marry this person or not, Decisions like where to go for school, decisions such as if I should go shopping today or finish my homework. It's assuming that we make all these decisions logically within criterion conditions. Well, that's not really the case. I'm sorry to point it out. That's why the satisficing and the incremental models came. So they said, all right, okay, we understand that human beings are not rational. The satisficing model is a model that we propose because we found out, how many of you have seen that? When you're dating or when you are shopping, very few of us will go look at a dress and say, oh my gosh, I love it, but let me keep this dress here, go and check on Amazon, or go and check on Zappos, or go and check on big name store brand departmental store and see how much are they selling it for, and is it the same? Usually what we do is we seek alternatives until we find the one that's satisfactory. All right, you want a black dress for an event, you go, and the first store usually that you find a decent dress that you like and fits your budget and it fits you well, you pick it up and bring it home. That's what the satisficing model says. Incremental model says, people don't really make decisions till they're forced to, so they'll take small steps, short-term steps to alleviate a problem till they're forced to do something radical about it. But none of these models really take into consideration the true perspective of what's happening when people make decisions. We are not walking through steps. So the next model of decision making that again comes within the non-rational perspective, but this one is a little bit more closer to how people really do make decisions, the intuition model. The intuition model says you make a choice without the use of conscious thought or logical inference. Your sources of making decisions are your own expertise and your feelings. Feelings are also called in American English gut. My gut feels. Well, it's not always a good idea to base our decisions on our gastrointestinal health because researchers found out that not everyone has very good intuition. So we don't know if we are basing our decisions on good data that we may have, good experience that we've had. So knowing that human beings are very, very prone to making non-rational decisions, that we are guided by emotions, that we are very much prone to making intuitive decisions that may or may not be good for the organization. What should a manager do? And that's the reason we study decision making. First, to understand that we are imperfect decision makers, but second, to understand how do we improve our decision-making process by using evidence-based decision making. EB is simply a method of collecting data. Everything you do should be based on data. And that's so important, especially in this day and age. We have so much data on everything, about everything. You want to try something new, I guarantee you 9 out of 10 times there will be data available out there. And I have a lot of students who say, well, no, my company falls in that 1%, 1 out of 10 times. Trust me, not really. You go out and you'll be able to find data. For example, you want to implement a policy of not allowing employees to date each other. And you want to find out what are the repercussions. Can we really do it? Was it successful? Will it increase performance? Well, there is data out there and you can look at it. Why? Well, treat your organization, or how do you do it? Well, treat your organization as an unfinished prototype. Don't just collect or find data from other people. Use your own organization's data, all right? Make sure you don't have overblown things written in your data. Just facts. Collect facts. And if you want to find out, should I turn my organization into a 4-day work week? Will my employees like it? Well, go ahead, ask them. There is no substitute for actually getting data from your employees. All right. see yourself and your organization as outsiders too. A lot of times we are not able to see things that may be wrong with our company, and we end up making wrong decisions because we're looking at the whole perspective from an insider. Try and be an outsider. You are able to sometimes see things that you wouldn't normally see. Or if you're not able to do that, bring an outsider in, which is why a lot of times it is a good idea to have a consultant who's an outsider, who's not a part of your company, because they can see things from a fresh perspective or a fresh face, a pair of eyes. Do remember, a lot of times I have clients who think, using data and evidence-based management is only for the CEOs or top level senior managers. No. Even if you are a first line supervisor, you can find data and use data, which is why it's really important to pay attention to your classes, especially the ones that help you understand research methods, because those classes are helping you understand what kind of data is best, where to search for data if your organization doesn't have its own data, right? What am I talking about when I say data? Right? Job satisfaction surveys, collecting age or demographics of your organization. So I will give you a small example. There was once an organization that was having a tough time recruiting. This was an organization that it was a tech company, data processing company, and they had very good HR packages. They were providing on-site daycare, childcare. They had a very good retirement package, but yet they weren't able to attract people, employees. What was the reason? Well, one of the biggest problems was they did not see themselves properly. They did not see who their demographic is. Most of the people who were working in their organization and the kind of people they were trying to hire were people who had just finished masters in computer science, most of them between the age of 21 and 26. Most of these people are young. Many of them are not really married, so they don't really care about retirement when you're 22 or 23. You don't care about childcare or daycare when you're not married or have no children. And so they were making all these decisions, but these decisions weren't really helping them because it wasn't based on actual hard facts. And the facts were their demographic, the population in their company did not really care for this stuff. And so it's really important to understand data is not just these random numbers someone tells you. They're your people. You can treat everything about your organization, including your human capital, into a data point and collect it. Understand it. The more you understand your company and the more information you have, the better your decision making is going to be. Now, do remember, data isn't everything. Just because you made a decision doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with you. So you will need to figure out a way to get people to buy into that decision. It's really important to do that. All right. And then, if all else fails, slow the spread of bad practices. Make sure people aren't using intuition or the faulty models of decision making. So we know data is important. We know that you should be using data to make decisions. However, it's still really hard for people to use evidence-based management. So why? Why do people still not use it? I mean, think about yourself. How many of you track your performance every semester? That's your data. And then look at planning out your performance for the next semester. How do you make your goals? Do you make your goals based on what you want? Or do you make your goals based on your performance? If you're making goals for your GPA every semester based on your performance, that is evidence-based management. But if you are making a goal for your performance because that's what you want, that's not a good method. You need to supplement it with the data that you have. What's the grade that I've been getting for the last 4 semesters? And how much, what's the increase in grade that I am getting when I work really hard, when I put twice as much work? That's data for you. But most of us don't do it. Why? Well, The thing is, we think there is too much evidence. We already know everything. We think, or we think there's not good enough evidence. Oh, no, no, no. What happened last semester is not indicative of my performance. It doesn't apply to me. No, no, no. There was something that happened last semester, so my performance from that semester doesn't matter. The semester before that was just strange. I wasn't well, and the semester before that I was my first semester, so none of the previous 3 semesters count. That doesn't really work that way. There are a number of reasons people, even in companies, will prefer not to use data because they think data is trying to mislead us. You are trying to mislead us. That the side effects, outweigh the cure that the data is giving me. No, no, no. But more importantly, people want to believe stories. Data doesn't really tell you stories. It's very cut and dried, and it becomes boring after a while. And so people don't want to pay attention to it because stories are much more compelling and persuasive, which is why people don't really use data. But I can't stress this enough. The world is going towards more data management and data analytics. And so it's really important to understand what is analytics. It's just a sophisticated form of business data processing and analysis, right? It's also called business analyticals. It looks at time series forecast, portfolio analysis, all the things that will help you forecast what your company should be doing. So now we've understood what's the best method to use to make decisions, but there are different kinds of data. And just like people are different in terms of their personality, people are also different in terms of their decision-making styles. So this is the point where you should pick up your decision-making style inventory and see what decision-making style is your dominant style. There are 4 decision-making styles based on what you value as a decision maker and how tolerant are you of ambiguity. So if you look at the very bottom left-hand side of this chart, the directive style of decision-making is a style where people, these decision makers are very, very task-oriented, right? And they have a low tolerance for ambiguity, right? They can't sit around waiting for more information. They like to make quick decisions. They are very, they're sometimes described as very decisive, right? They're efficient, they're logical, they're practical, and they're systematic in their approach to solving problems. They're very action-oriented and decisive, and they like to focus on facts, not emotions, on facts. But what's the problem with this decision-making style? Well, if you are a directive decision-making style, pay attention. You may be called autocratic at times. Or people may tell you that you are too quick. Or people may tell you, you are very stubborn. Once you've made up your mind, you don't change it. We've seen that with directive styles. Let's move on to the right-hand side of directive and look at behavioral, right? Behavioral style is, again, these people have very low tolerance for ambiguity. So they are quick decision makers. But they are very much focused on people and emotions and social structures and social norms. So they're very supportive. They're very receptive to suggestions. They're very warm. They prefer verbal to written information. But what's the downside? If you are a behavioral style decision maker, you probably are told that you're someone who has a very hard time saying no. You are overly concerned about feelings. You shouldn't be concerned about feelings. That you're very judgmental, and you make your decisions based on emotions and people too quickly. Now, keep in mind, not a single one of these decision-making styles is the best style. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. All right, so let's move up into the grid to analytical and conceptual. So analytical style of decision making is the style where people have very high tolerance for ambiguity. What does that mean? It means that you're willing to wait for new information before you make a decision. All right, you're willing to suspend decision making because there is information that's missing. And analytical people, but they are very, very task-oriented, right? They analyze everything. They consider more information and alternatives. They're very careful, and they're open to new information. But if you're an analytical style decision maker, you've probably been accused of being overanalyzing everything. You've been told that you take too long to make a decision or that you're indecisive. It is because you are analyzer. You like to wait for more information to come before you make your decision, right? Conceptual style of decision maker, finally, these are the people who have people and social concern, and they have a very high tolerance for ambiguity as well. They take a broad perspective to problem solving. They like to consider many options and future possibilities. They're very creative and intuitive, but what's the problem with them? Just like the analytical style, they can be indecisive because they have a high tolerance for ambiguity. They keep waiting for more information. These are the people who don't mind changing their first impressions about people. But most of the times, they have a hard time making opinions or judgments about people. They're told they're wishy-washy or they flip-flop. That's not the case. They just have a conceptual style. They're much more open. They are very, very concerned about people's feelings. So conceptual style people are the people who will think over and over before doing something how their actions might affect someone or how their actions will hurt someone. So since I've said not a single one of these decision-making styles is perfect, well, what do? Do you need to have all three styles? Oh, not really. Just like personality, you can't really have all four styles. You might be someone who has one dominant style, or you might be someone who has two dominant styles, but you will never be able to have more than that, right? So what do? Well, this is why group decision making is an important topic. Whenever you are making an important decision, especially in an organization, make sure you find other people who have a different style of decision making than you. Don't find people who are like you. Don't find people you get along with. Find people you may not get along with. Find people who are different than you, because they will have a different style of decision making, and they will prevent your blind spots because they're able to see things from a perspective you're not. Right? So what are the different situations or responses that people have when they're in a decision situation? That's the next thing to talk about. Ideally, we would like everyone to make a decision and make a decision effectively and efficiently. That doesn't always happen, right? People will have different styles of responding to a situation that needs decision making, right? So what are the different ineffective styles or ineffective responses to a decision situation? Well, the relaxed style, I call it delusional, because it's the style where managers decide to take no action in the belief that there will be no great negative consequences. They're relaxed. They sit back and they think, I don't need to do anything. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing bad is going to happen. Relaxed change is very similar to the satisficing model, right? This is the style where managers realize that complete inaction will have negative consequences, but they still opt for the first available alternative that involves low risk, right? Defensive avoidance is the next style. They keep getting slightly better or worse. Defensive avoidance is when a manager can't find a good solution and follows by procrastinating, passing the buck, or denying the risk of any negative consequences. And finally, panic, right? You've tried relax, tried relaxed change, you've tried defensive avoidance, now you're going to panic mode where you start dumping or firing people. This is when manager is frantic to get rid of the problem that he or she cannot deal with, and they start doing all kinds of other things in a panic that actually make the situation worse. So then what are the effective ways of responding to a decision situation? Well, there are three things to do, right? Looking at, first, importance. How high priority is the situation? Do I need to make a decision right now? That's urgency. Importance would be, do I need to make a decision? Or can I be relaxed? How important is it? How high priority is it? Is it something that only I can do, or can I give it to someone else? Credibility looks at how believable is the information about the situation. Look at it before you make a decision. let's say you're trying to solve a conflict at workplace between two employees. Well, first figure out where the information is coming from and what the credibility of the information is. And then finally, urgency. How quickly must you act on the information about the situation? Do you have to make a decision today, this moment? Or can you put it off till next week, by which time you will have more information? So these are the 3 criteria you should be using for every decision scenario to help you understand how to make that decision. Now, till now, we've been talking about decision making as a, process. And remember, I told you how we as human beings are imperfect. We're very, very irrational. We function on emotions. We function on heuristics, all right? And heuristics are our biases, decision-making biases that happen, not because we want to be biased, but because we are irrational. We don't use logic. We're not computer programs that can make a decision through a flowchart. All right. So what are the different kinds of heuristics? I won't be able to go over each of them, but let me explain some of the ones from here. All right. So let's take, for example, the first one, availability bias. All right. Availability bias is when a manager uses only information that is readily available from memory to make judgments. Right. That's an availability bias. So, for example, if someone tells you, smoking cigarettes is bad, but you've had a grandma who lived to be 95 and she used to smoke cigarettes every single day, and you say, you know what? No, you're wrong. All this data that shows that, more than 80% of the people or smokers get lung diseases or lung cancer, whatever. My grandma was 95 and she smoked every day, so I'm not going to die. That's an availability bias. All right. You are basing your decision on the readily available information in your head. Don't do that. Look at the data. All right. Confirmation bias. What's the confirmation bias? It's when people seek information to support their pre-existing point of view and discount any new information that is contrary. So let's say, for example, that you really love coffee and your day doesn't start without coffee. You usually drink about a gallon of coffee a day, right? And someone brings in information about how coffee farms are dying, and because of global warming, coffee production is going down. So instead of thinking, well, maybe I should reduce my coffee consumption, if you start saying, well, see, that's why I need to buy more coffee. The more we buy, the more the companies will be forced to change their practices and to grow more coffee. That's confirmation bias. You're using whatever information is available to confirm what you already believe. Okay, and let me talk about the representativeness bias, right? The representativeness bias it refers to the tendency to generalize from a small sample or a single event, right? So let's say, for example, that, representativeness bias is very often seen in stereotyping. So if, you have your only experience with Indian professors or Indians has been your professor. So let's assume your only experience with Indians is Dr. Priya. And let's assume you don't like Dr. Priya. Next time you meet someone who's Indian, your representativeness bias, if you have a representativeness bias, you will think, well, all Indians are bad. All Indians are horrible since Dr. Priya was horrible. So no, I'm not going to do business with someone who's Indian. That's a representativeness bias. What's the sunk cost bias? Well, when managers add up all the money already spent on a project and they conclude that it's too costly to simply abandon it, it's the sunk cost bias. And it's very closely related to escalation of commitment bias, which is when decision makers increase their commitment to a project despite negative information. And a lot of times it happens because there's already sunk cost. Because you've already put in so much money, you just think, oh, no, we shouldn't stop now. So an example would be someone who's doing an undergrad in, let's say you're doing undergrad and your major is accounting. And halfway through your major, you realize that you hate accounting, or maybe finance or marketing or something else. You realize that you hate it. And you think, you know what, I've already spent 2 years doing this major. It doesn't make sense for me to move to a different major now. I have so much money and time that I've sunk into it. So even though I would love to major in management, I'm not going to move because I've already spent so much time. It's the same. It's actually a bad decision, because just because you've been miserable 2 years doesn't mean you should make yourself miserable for 2 more years. And so that's a sunk cost bias. And escalation of commitment. Similarly, when you keep increasing your commitment more and more and more to your bad decision, for example, a good example is marriage. That you're married to someone and you realize that it's not a good relationship, that you shouldn't be with this person, and that maybe you should break up with them or have a divorce, but you keep putting in more effort into this relationship, hoping, well, maybe if I did these 10 things, my relationship would improve. Or maybe if I did 5 of those things, my relationship would improve. And every time you see negative information, instead of using that negative information to decide to get out of that relationship, you keep putting in more effort. You actually increase your effort after negative information. That is escalation of commitment bias, all right? Clearly, all these biases show us that we don't really work as rational human beings. Rational people would not have confirmation bias. Rational people would not have escalation of commitment. And so remember that every time you are making a decision, be aware. Look around and think, am I making this decision based on emotion? Or am I making this decision because it's the right thing in the long run? So we've been talking about individual decision making so far. Let's talk about group decision making, right? Many companies use group decision making as a method of decision making instead of using individual decision making. Or some companies supplement. They use individual decision making at some levels, but then they use group decision making at some other levels, right? So why? What are the advantages of using group decision making, right? First, you get a greater pool of knowledge. Remember how we said different people have different decision styles? Well, different people have different sets of knowledge and expertise. So you get a lot more knowledge, right? You get different perspectives. 2 people will not necessarily see the same situation from the same angle. So if you are using a group decision-making process, you're getting all these different perspectives. It is intellectually stimulating, right? People learn from each other. We challenge each other to see things differently, which sometimes actually helps us come up with better solutions. It also clarifies our decision rationale. When you're trying to explain your situation and why you want to make a certain decision to someone, it forces you to clarify your own thinking. All right. And it actually increases commitment to the decision. If 5 people make a decision together, the chances of all 5 of them sticking with that decision are bigger than if all 5 of them were told to do this thing by their boss. Most of you must have seen that too. If you want to go to a party, it's a group of friends. If you all think about and decide where to go, there are higher chances that people will be happy with it. But if one friend decides where everyone should go, everyone starts complaining after a while. So there are big advantages to group decision making. But at the same time, and I know some of you must already be thinking about it, there are disadvantages to group decision making. All right, what are those? Right. First, sometimes a few people might dominate or intimidate, especially if you have an aggressive, dominant personality in the group. They might dominate everyone. Groupthink might happen, right? What is groupthink? We'll talk about that in just a second. Satisficing. You might just decide on the first good solution everyone comes up with, instead of looking at all possible solutions, just because you're tired of being in a room with people, right? Goal displacement. You sometimes when you're trying to make a decision in a group of people, people are talking, they go on tangent. Goal might get displaced. You get off track. So what is groupthink? We talked about groupthink earlier. What is groupthink? Groupthink is when members, they start to agree or they strive to agree for the sake of unanimity, and they avoid assessing the situation. What we've seen is sometimes if it's a very, very cohesive group is a group that's a very tight-knit group. People have known each other for years. They know how the other person thinks. They also like each other a lot. We've seen people are less likely to disagree with each other. And when that happens, you don't get new perspectives. Everyone thinks the same way. If you've ever seen, if you have a good friend, a very dear friend that you've known for years, chances are by now you've noticed how both of you like the same things, or both of you think the same way. Well, that means new ideas don't necessarily come to you or your group on their own. You need to bring in fresh perspective and get rid of groupthink. One of the ways to do that is to bring someone with a very different perspective, or to make someone a devil's advocate. Just get someone to disagree for the sake of disagreeing. It sounds silly, but it instigates people to think of their decisions or their solutions from a different perspective, right? So because we know there are so many disadvantages of group decision making, yes, there are advantages, but also an equal number of disadvantages. When can a group help in making decisions, all right? Well, especially, very, very importantly, when a group decision, when you need a high quality decision, when you need the decision to be accepted by everyone. So it makes the buy-in really easy. When the decision can increase development, all right? Those are the three. Let me go back to it. Those are the three situations when you really need to think about and use group decision making, when you want high quality, accepted decision that leads to development. There are different group problem solving techniques, right? The first technique is called consensus. It's a technique that many of you may have already heard of, right? Reaching consensus is using groups to make decisions, unanimous decisions, right? It occurs when members are able to agree. They're able to express their opinions and reach an agreement to support the decision. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone agrees with the decision. It just means that they're willing to work towards success. A different type is brainstorming. It's a technique used to help groups generate ideas, right? Brainstorming is much more for generating than agreeing on ideas. It consists of having members of a group meet, review a problem, and then individual members are asked to either silently or in discussion generate ideas. And brainstorming usually involves just coming up with ideas. You don't evaluate ideas. You just keep coming up with ideas, however silly they may sound, however far-fetched they may sound. Once you have all the ideas on a paper or board, then you start critiquing them, and then you start evaluating them. The final technique for decision making, group decision or group problem solving, is the Delphi technique. Delphi is a group process that uses physically dispersed experts. So if you are dealing with a virtual team where 5 people are on their computers, so an online class, if you've ever taken an online class where you had to do group projects, let's say a virtual team, right? In this particular situation, experts fill out questionnaires anonymously to generate ideas. And Delphi technique also helps if people are scared that they might be judged or punished for disagreeing or coming up with a solution that's unusual. So they fill out questionnaires anonymously online, and then the judgments are combined and averaged to achieve a consensus in the expert opinion. And finally, you could have computer-aided decision-making. Delphi is a computer-aided decision-making technique, all right? But you could use a decision support system. It's a computer-based information system that provides a flexible tool for analysis and helps managers focus on the future. So given the day and age we're living in, more and more work is being conducted through computer techniques and computer systems and computer softwares. And so it's really important to understand where they help and how they help. They may not always help with brainstorming. We've noticed thus far that being in a physical location together helps brainstorming, but the Delphi technique can be done through brainstorming. A lot of times consensus can be reached through, Delphi technique can be done through computer support systems, and consensus sometimes can be reached through computer support systems. So that's all for this chapter. Till next time, till time it is for the next chapter, this is me saying adieu. As always, please feel free to send me an email if you have problems, or make an appointment with me. Yes.